old can we date the Masoretic Hebrew Old Bible, the Old Testament? When does it start showing up in the sources? You know, the people think that Moses wrote the Torah in like the Bronze Age. Some people say like 1300 BC. Moses started writing the Torah, and it's been passed down since then. And then, you know, new books are added or whatever. That's nonsense. In fact, when Israel got conquered by the Assyrians, by Nebuchadnezzar, in 597 BCE, most of the Jews were brought to Babylon. Everyone knows this story. It's famous. The fall of the first temple. What we found out later is that a lot of Jews went back into Egypt. And it was like an exodus backwards. And they settled in this city called Elephantine. So Elephantine is a city of an ancient Jewish city in Egypt that dates, we have texts from that period from archaeology. We dug up papyri, thousands of papyri. So we know what they believed in. We know what their ideas were. There is no Moses. There is no Noah. There's no David. There's no mention of Abraham. Nothing. And they're worshiping multiple gods. So wait a minute. If the Torah already existed before Nebuchadnezzar in 597 BCE, wouldn't these Jews in Elephantine have Moses and Abraham and Noah in these texts? They'd have zero. We have thousands of texts from this place. No, not one mention of Abraham, not one mention of Moses. And they dug up thousands of papyri and inscriptions. And they have Yahweh. They call him Yahu. It's a different spelling of the way Yahweh, but he's there. So it is the Jews, and they're writing in Aramaic. They fled Israel in 597 BCE.
597 BC.
So between 597 and 410, that's a long time, 200 years, right?
Yeah.
We have texts that are dating between 597 and 410 from that city, and none of them mention Abraham, Moses, or Noah.
Now, some people are going to say that the Gnostic informant, who is the gentleman speaking, was incorrect. That it does mention the Passover because of the Passover papyri. And they're going to try to use the Passover papyri in order to say that there must have been somebody said something about the fact that Moses existed because they had the Passover papyri, because how else would they have been able to know about the Passover if it wasn't for Moses? And then there are others who are going to say that he is incorrect and that the Jews that was in Elephantine were a heretical group, a splinter group of Judaism. Well, in this video, I'm going to prove that both of those two arguments against his statements and against the idea that the Masoretic text could not have been written more than likely in the Hellenistic period during the Hasmonean time frame. I often like to give credit that some aspects of it may have been written during the 800s, but in its whole, in its totality, and as far as these Old Testament Pentateuch stories, they weren't written until the Hasmonean dynasty, which is in the 3rd century. So a full 100 to 200 years later was these Moses, Noah, Adam, Eve stories all written. So, let me add one more thing before I get started. If the Elephantine Papyri did show that this Torah and this Bible was correct, why don't they talk more about that instead of the Dead Sea Scrolls? You talk to a Christian and they always go to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls only date as far back as the Hasmonean dynasty, which demonstrates also that this text, these stories of Genesis, were first created during the Hellenistic period, during the 3rd century BCE, and not written by Moses or anyone else. And neither did the Jews of David and all of them had any knowledge of this information, if David existed himself, but some variation of it, which was based on somebody else's religion. So let me get into the two aspects that I promised on this video. Number one, when they talk about Passover, and Passover being the Passover papyri, one of the things that they mistakenly do, and quite often, is that they do archaeology with the shovel in one hand and the Bible in the other. Because in this Passover papyri, which never mentions the word Passover at any time frame, it merely is a priest or an official in Jerusalem who is telling a soldier at Elephantine to make sure that he has his drink and as well as his unleavened bread, that he do not eat anything unleavened And it doesn't even say bread. It says, do not eat anything unleavened between these 15-day time frame, and to celebrate with the drink. Now, this is at the beginning of the year, and you have to understand that all people in the Mediterranean at this time frame had the same New Year in the spring, not in the winter, but in the spring. So he was reminding him to make sure that he doesn't eat anything unleavened during this 14-day time frame, and on the 15th day to have his drink. Well, that letter is dated at 519 BCE. And we know that it's dated at 519 BCE because he said in the 5th year of the reign of King Darius II. And that is how we know what the dating of that letter is beyond any shadow of a doubt, based on its own statements. So, many have automatically said that they were observing the Passover, so therefore they must have been observing Moses. But what they failed to realize is that they were under the Persian Empire. The people at Elephantine were a small island rock that was utilized and utilized as a military garrison for the Persian Empire's efforts against Nubia and Egypt. And so this garrison, this fort that was there, was ruled by the Persian. As a matter of fact, in one of the letters, or one of the tablets that we have found concerning this, is that King Darius, in this time frame, declared it a Ilulu, a leap year, and told the people when they would participate in their holidays. And his holidays were government sanctioned. His holidays were agricultural. And the other aspect of it is that in one of the tablets, it was found that King Darius was saying that, no, you're not going to do the one of their festivals during that time frame that month. You're going to wait another month to do it because their leap year had an extra month. So what you have is that in the Zoroastrian practice, and this is why many just jump to the Torah and say that this is Moses, because they don't know the Zoroastrian practice to which King Darius and the Archimedeans were a part of. The Zoroastrian practice says that Ahura Mazda, in the worship of Ahura Mazda, that in the spring, in the beginning of the year, which is springtime, so you are commemorating the harvest because you've made it through the winter and you had a great harvest last year and you want to have a great harvest this year. In commemoration of Ahura Mazda, making sure that you were you had your harvest, you drink the hamona, which is a drink that is dedicated to him, and you have the unleavened bread. You don't eat anything unleavened, this flat piece of bread that can only be kneaded by the wife of a priest, that you eat that during this time frame. And this was directed by the Persians, by the Zoroastrians, and the Jewish people followed suit. You also had in the letter where he gave praise to all the gods when he said Ilahaya, where he praised all the gods in plural. So what we see in the Elephantine Papyrus is that this is something that is a Persian, Zoroastrian worship. It is not the Passover. So they also was a part of that was to ward off evil spirits. So you see how the story could have changed to putting lamb blood over your door to ward off the spirit. So it wasn't part of that. And as far as them being heretical, there were other Elephantine letters that where they were asking for help from the church in Jerusalem to rebuild their temple, because their temple had been damaged during some Persian uprising against the Jewish people. So the temple in Jerusalem was still fine with them and spoke to them and was helpful in them rebuilding their temple. And if the Torah was around prior to that, the temple would not have helped, because Deuteronomy says that there should only be worship in Jerusalem. The temple can only be in Jerusalem, but they were perfectly fine with helping them rebuild their temple in Elephantine. So they weren't heretical. They were in lockstep with the people in Jerusalem. So study the Elephantine Papyri. I've been studying it for a little while now, but you will see that this Bible and much of the doctrine is just fake. But always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.